12 years after the release of its predecessor, Dragons Dogma 2 finally arrived on the scene with massive hype all over the world from gamers all around. It's got dragons, exploration, great combat, you can climb monsters, Cyclops you could use as bridges, goblins, so many goblins. Having only ever watched Let's Plays of the original, I felt like I had missed out and was understandably excited for the new release. It had everything going for it. A massive open world, great looking graphics, combat that looks intuitive and generally fun. By all accounts, the game should have been great. So why wasn't it? To understand the significance of the sequel, we first have to talk about the original that set off this new title. Dragons Dogma was the golden child of Hideaki Itsuno, famous for his prior work on the Devil May Cry series. His idea of having a group of manageable AIs, known as pawns that make up the other players in your party, was groundbreaking to say the least back in the day. So groundbreaking, in fact, that the executives at Capcom were left scratching their heads at the idea of this kind of game. Would it even work? And honestly, I get it. Itsuno was pioneering a new type of gaming experience, never before seen in gaming. The highly ambitious RPG would be released in the summer of 2012 to overwhelmingly positive reception, despite the lack of a multiplayer system that was becoming even more prevalent in gaming as a whole. Though not without its flaws, as many had noticed the lack of polish as well as frame rate issues. But it was still enough of a success in Capcom's eyes that they eventually gave Itsuno the thumbs up to start work on the sequel. And so Itsuno and his team, now emboldened by their success, began the 12-year-long development cycle to make the sequel to this ambitious if flawed title. It wasn't completely surprising, since Itsuno himself had stated that they were testing out a lot of different ideas that had been left on the cutting board during the development of the original. And with Itsuno's commitment to other IPs, including Resident Evil at the time, we were gonna have to wait for a little while. Okay, maybe a little longer than a little while. The silence around the game was so deafening, most gamers had already thought this game was gonna be stuck in development hell for the rest of our lives. Capcom game producer Hoshiaki Hirabashi, I completely butchered that, even went on the record to discuss why the game had taken such a long time to release. And quote, "Dragons Dogma is a really valuable IP to us. We know we wanted to make a sequel at an early stage, but there really wasn't one particular thing that had changed from no to a green light. It was more that we needed a lot of things to fall into place. First and foremost, if Utsuno-san doesn't have time to be the director of the game, it can't really be made. So having an opportunity to have him spend the time he needed on the game, and being able to bring together the other resources, such as a large team to work on the game with this scope, just took some years for all to really fit together. And then once it did, we got started. And after all the planets aligned, years of waiting, and the highly anticipated reveal at Capcom in June 2022, Dragons Dogma 2 was officially here. And by here, meaning we were gonna have to wait another year or two for the game to actually release, but come on. It was here, and people were hyped. So with all this build-up, why didn't it live up to the hype then? What went wrong? And so we arrive on the awaited day of the release. Dragons Dogma 2 is here. Gamers all over boot up their consoles and PCs and what have you, and start playing the game, myself included. I was there on day one. And for the most part, the game was pretty fun. Starting off the bat with one of the most intricate and detailed character customizations I have ever witnessed in gaming was definitely a compelling start. I've seen people recreate famous faces with almost uncanny accuracy, all the way to biblically accurate abominations that I can only hope I never run into in a dark alley. I mean, just look at this freaking things. Ugh. Oh god, get that off my fucking screen. Though, initially it took me a while to get used to the combat system and stamina management despite my years of Souls games. At the start, you're pretty weak. And I mean weak. Like, everything can kill you if you're not careful, and it was actually brutal to the point where I thought the game was straight up bullying me. Dude, there is... something's trying to kill me on every point. Help! Wolf! Got me! Dude, I am getting slaughtered here. The class system made me want to try out many different skills and systems the game had to offer. Although in my first playthrough I did feel myself leaning towards the warrior. You know, cause bonk. Though janky at times, especially if you had the pleasure of playing this with a keyboard and mouse, it was fun for the most part, climbing atop large enemies, slowly whittling away at their health bars, or just building the most batshit character ever and spamming enemies into oblivion with some borderline broken skill moves. But that was the fun of it. It had something for everyone. And it worked. For the most part. The real problem came from me, like many others, with the lack of enemy variety. At a certain point, this game could have been called Goblin Slayer, and most players wouldn't have batted an eye. Okay. To play devil's advocate, maybe they're saving up some of the more interesting, compelling enemy types for like future expansions. Only time will tell. And that's not even mentioning the skill gap that seems to make lower levels feel like you're fighting for your life every 10 feet with constant horde of enemies dogpiling you while a griffin flies overhead waiting for the chance to swoop in at the most inconvenient but often hilarious times. What the hell? Where'd that griffin come from?
This is a foe worthy of caution. Not to say our best.
Who invited you? Well, he wants to party? Let's party. Wait, don't go that way!
Never have I encountered such a strategy. Unbelievable.
What a freaking idiot. He just jumped. Okay, wait, he just got turned into soup for freaking nothing. And then you level up, and suddenly, it's a different game. You're so OP, so fast, and enemies that took hours to beat before get slapped away with the flick of your wrist, making the endgame a little unsatisfying. And the pawn system was something I had personally never experienced outside of videos I'd seen of, like, the original Dragons Dogma. The pawns made the journey around the lands much more enjoyable, with them being intuitive enough to point out things that were within reach, paths they'd taken with other arisen, and, of course, ladders. So many ladders.
This ladder can take us to new heights.
Again with the frickin' ladders. Then comes the exploration, which should have felt like a high point. And it was most of the time. Like I mentioned before, pawns help make the navigation much more fun, as there was usually something interesting to see, valuables to collect. It was a big map. There was one problem for me, like, I couldn't get around it. A teeny tiny problem. The fucking travel time. Here we notice one of the weakest aspects of the game. Itsuno had gone on record talking about how fast travel wasn't in the game because, and I quote, "It's only an issue because your game is boring. All you have to do is make travel fun. That's why you place things in the right location for players to discover, or come up with enemy appearance methods that create different experiences each time, or force players into blind situations where they don't know whether it's safe or not, meters in front of them." And I get where he's coming from, in theory, but when seeing this philosophy play out in a game, it did feel like the game really didn't care that much about the player's time, and for me that was a major red flag. Because the artificial risk of travel was quickly overcome the moment you got better gear, and could tank most of the enemies that came into your way. At that point, it felt more tedious than anything, having to get from one point to another. Sure, when the enemies came you could always run away, but sometimes the enemy AI was just straight up broken. Like they'd run ridiculous distance out. I'm talking Dark Souls 1 chasing you to the ends of the fucking... Cue the Spider-Man.
Get back here, Shocker! Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
Especially given the game's travel system using port crystals and fairy stones, which were limited to hell when the game first launched, but was quickly patched to make them more, available. But even then, sometimes you just wanted to go to a far-off location to get something for a quest, but you didn't have a port crystal, or even ox carts going there because they only travel from city to city, and had to physically walk all the way there. Which still wouldn't be that much of an issue if for one fucking thing. The fucking Arisen uses stamina while sprinting while not in combat. It wouldn't be more than 20 seconds of running before it felt like your character needed a fucking inhaler. Rinse and repeat until you reached the point you were supposed to, only then to realize you have to walk all the way back now because you fucking forgot to put down a port crystal at the place you were first when you started. Okay, got that out of my system. The decision to keep the game frame locked on consoles to 30 FPS in a time when gamers are used to much higher frame rates was ridiculous given the number of frame drops when entering settlements, and sometimes in combat, though I didn't notice it as much on my console, though this was sort of resolved in later patches. Along with that, the decision to make the game have no new game feature at the beginning was a really odd one, I have to say. Like, it made no sense to me at all. Along with the fact that you can only have one playable character at a time instead of a multi-save option. It's an RPG, let me have a save where I'm the tanky warrior, just bashing the hell out of anything that comes in my way, taking extreme damage and dealing the same. And then let me go full anime, let me be a mystic spearhand flying from place to place, just appearing out of bumfuck nowhere. And if I really want to, just let me be an overleveled warfarer that just has freaking everything. It was pretty annoying, like having to make a separate account just to play this game. Like if you're on PC, you're just shit out of luck. Unless, mods or something. At this point, you'll notice there is a specific elephant in the room regarding, some of their less than ethical business decisions. You know what I'm talking about, But I already think every other creator on the platforms beated that dead horse into mush, so we'll talk about it briefly, but probably somewhere near the end. Overall, the gameplay loop gives you enough to keep you hooked, while obviously having some shortcomings. What makes me sad personally is given everything that I found out about the game prior to release. This game was my top peg for Game of the Year, and I can't help but feel if this game had just been delayed for a couple of more months, maybe even a year. Like, they delayed it 12 years, what's another year on top of that? Fuck. But if it'd been delayed, maybe they could have ironed out these kinks. But there's still patches to come, and the DLC, maybe there's hope in the DLC when it comes to that. We'll see. But now we have to get to the next main part of this game, which is the... Alright. Before we dive too deep into the story, we gotta discuss the difference between lore and story. Lore is the deep untold secrets that govern the rules of the world that you rarely experience direct. Story is what you experience directly as your character. The lore behind Dragons Dogma 2 and its world is genuinely interesting. It's great, actually. And it could make for a video just on itself. The story we get to experience, however, it's pretty fucking bad. It was disappointing. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It was pretty fucking bad. The story made no sense for the most part, which sucks because while it's true that Dragons Dogma 2 is an action RPG, the addition of a good story wouldn't have damaged it. If anything, it would have made it better. It's an amazing game. Like, it could have been an amazing freaking game. It's kind of fucked it up. For me, at least. Instead, we're introduced to plot points which are shown to be so serious and so urgent, only for you to get close to resolving them, to just realize they really don't matter. Like, the story felt so rushed and so uninspired that at one point my brain just went into full-on autopilot and I just had to play the game as a game. Said, fuck the story, let's just enjoy this game again. As just a brain dead, no plot, jump on shit and busted down Monster Hunter. The side quests especially felt really half-baked at best, and some of them were just goddamn tedious. Looking at you, Sphinx! There was just no way anyone was completing those quests without the use of a guide. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with using a guide if you're having a hard time understanding where to go, but the game, like for a random side quest, it makes sense. But when it's for the main fucking story, like the main driving plot of the game, you kind of have a bad situation there. Like 1 second I'm in the middle of this royal conspiracy, and the next you're asking me to rush to Batal. Why? Some kind of race war, I don't fucking know. The only real moment came at the very end of the game, at one of the last scenes in the game of the true ending. That's one of 3 endings you can possibly get. You get a hint of emotion there, but the fact that you have to get to the very end of the game before it finally hits you with the reality of the world you live in should have been a bit more prevalent in the beginning of the game. You know, to keep you involved, to keep the stakes feeling real. In a world as rich as lore as that of Dragons Dogma, the frankly weak, piss-poor attempt at a story sticks out like a sore thumb. And it makes it hard for you to be emotionally invested in the journey of the Arisen. And on that note, a lot of people were really invested in the highly anticipated release. So that brings us to... While it was universally praised by critics for building upon the original game from 12 years ago, most also admitted it had some flaws. Players, however, were really initially pissed off because of one little hiccup. Yes, we're discussing the elephant in the room. The microtransactions. Look, I guess we're beating off the dead horse as well, so why not? Here's my 2 cents. Single player games should not have microtransactions unless they're just, you know, cosmetics and skins, and even that's a borderline. Like, if that line is crossed, it's a red flag for me. And it was a red flag for most people because, like, the game had a mostly negative review on Steam at the time of release, and a 6.3 on Metacritic at the time of this recording. So, yeah, people were kind of pissed. But that whole thing was great for Twitter and hashtags and trending, but once you got past that, you actually had a game that was fun, and most of the time those microtransactions didn't even really matter. Like, okay, sure, most of the things that they were selling, you could easily get that in the game. Like, it wasn't that much of a deal, but, you know, outrage be outraged, people get mad. Factoring that in with what seemed to be a rushed out game, and there's also this one thing, I'm kind of putting my tinfoil hat on for the moment, but Capcom was at the end of their fiscal year, like 10 days after Dragons Dogma 2's release date. So maybe that's why it felt rushed. Maybe they were just like trying to pad their bottom line, didn't care at the end. They were just like, fuck it, these gamers will buy anything, just ship that game out. Just get it away from you. Start the next moneymaker. Ultimately, Dragons Dogma 2 was ambitious, immersive, fun, but does leave you with a bittersweet feeling considering how much potential the game had, where it could have gone, and what could have happened. But there's still the DLC to wait out for. So for now, let's just hope for the best and expect the worst. I'm still playing from time to time. I like the game. It's generally enjoyable for me. But yeah, that's where I want to hear your thoughts. How did you like the game? What were the highlights of this game for you? What were the shortcomings? Tell me down in the comments below. If you liked the video, want to see more stuff like this, drop a like, maybe subscribe if you want. I don't know, I'm not your mama. Do whatever you want. But yeah, thanks for watching if you sticked up to it. Catch you next time. Peace out.